Hello everyone, Santu here, and today I realized when talking with a friend recently that while I've talked at great length about the build system in Guild Wars 1, and I've talked quite a lot about the individual skills at this point with the skill review project, when speaking with this friend, he pointed out to me that I haven't really talked about actually making a build, so that's what I want to talk about today. And I don't want to talk about it in the context of just like an individual character. I want to talk about it in the context of a team. Now, this isn't something that everybody needs to 100% do. There's a lot of resources out there. PVX Wiki is an option, for example, to be able to get team builds that other people have put together for various reasons and for various purposes and for different scenarios. But for somebody like me, the enjoyment of the game is making a build and understanding what goes into making a build and what do I want to do and experimenting and trying different things. And so it seems to me that it would be really interesting to talk about this particular process because I, for some reason, have massively lapsed in not talking about it up to this point, really. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of start. There's a couple of different parameters that we have to establish at the beginning. First of all, I'm going to be focusing on making a team build using heroes. Heroes are customizable AI companions that you can bring with you. There are other AI companions you can bring with you. There's actually a bunch over here. They're called henchmen. They have very specific skill sets. You cannot customize what they do. You can only choose which ones you bring. So, for example, Headmaster Vang over here is called a shock henchman. He probably will give me a little bit story stuff if I talk to him, but he's probably going to have air magic spells. He's an elementalist. You can see that by selecting on him. Kai Ying is an earth henchman, but he's also an elementalist. Professor Guy is a ritualist and says he's a spirit henchman. So this is an option for teams if you're at a point where you don't have heroes. The other thing is, like, we need to talk about the constraints. When you're working by yourself in the sort of more single-player style of game, which is what I tend to do most of the time, if I'm going to be playing a specific character, I'm locked into what that character is in terms of their primary profession, and I only have so many options of heroes. Now, this character's done quite a lot, and so I have a lot of different heroes available to me. But when you're first starting out, you're going to be fairly limited in your supply of heroes. You might need to augment them with henchmen. There's all sorts of stuff that way. Now, if you're playing with other players, it's going to be based around what do they want to do, what options do they have, and if you're going into the more hardcore areas, you might be intentionally crafting your team build around who you have available and what you guys want to do and all sorts of stuff. So what I'm going to focus on is specifically the case of it is a character that you have that you want to do something with. You want to make a build. You don't want to just like slap random skills on. You want to be intentional about it, and you have access to heroes to do it with. There's a couple of important things that before you can even go about making a build, you need to focus on. And those are going to be your constraints. It's constraints such as what skills do you have available to you, how many party members are in the zone. So for example, here you can see my party formation 1 of 8. I can have up to 8 people in this party. But if I go somewhere else, say to my village over here, once this loads, which you'll see 1 out of 4. I can only have 4 people in this party. That's a pretty big difference, and that's a really important consideration. And there's other areas, I think Setong Harbor is this way, that have 6. So what you'll find is in the game, there are some areas where you have a maximum party capacity of 4, some areas where you have a maximum of 6, and some areas where you have a maximum of 8. Most of the game is maximum of 8. There's 2 special areas that have a maximum of 12. Those ones are real hard to do things with without other players, though, because they're made to kind of be separate players. You basically want to do it with at least 2 other players if you're going to go into those areas. Anyway, I'm going to go back to the marketplace because I'm going to discuss from here. But just keep in mind that some of your balancing of the various elements is going to necessarily have to be different based upon the number of party members you can actually just bring with you. 6 tends to be the weirdest. The game is kind of based around having 8 party members, and 4 being half that kind of works out okay, in that you just take kind of like half of a full party, but 6 is kind of this weird awkward middle zone. But anyway, when you're making a team, there's a couple of important things you want to consider. One of the big ones is going to be how are you going to take care of various roles? So there tend to be a couple of different roles that are important to fulfill, and one character can kind of play in a couple of different roles at once. So as an example of what I'm talking about, there is damage. Obviously, that's a role. That's dealing damage to enemies. That's how you win battles. But there's also things like control type things where you're trying to mitigate what the opponent is trying to do. So on the other hand, there's stuff of where you're trying to keep yourself alive. So I would generally break roles down into damage, control, and then support. Support includes both protective things, increasing your party's damage, as well as healing. So you can kind of break that up a little bit more into like healing and protection type stuff. So party support in terms of defense and party support in terms of offense. So as an example of how one character can kind of play into different roles, you can have, say, a hammer warrior. Hammer as an attribute line has a lot of knockdowns, and knockdowns allow you to be able to control the enemy. They allow you to be able to interrupt actions. They allow you to be able to stop them from chasing people. So as a hammer warrior, your primary task is probably dealing damage. That's something that you're going to be good at with a weapon and attacking and all that sort of stuff. That's what warriors do. They tend to focus primarily on, I'm dealing damage. But they also are well capable of bringing various support skills with them. Like I said, Hammer can play the role of you're going into the enemy backline and trying to disrupt them, or you're playing what's called linebacker and you're going into your own backline and trying to protect your allies from their offensive core of melee attackers. So you kind of need to figure out what roles our character's playing. And usually you're going to kind of lean into a couple of them, and you're kind of going to have a couple of different directions. So for example, a Mesmer, such as Gwen here. Gwen, she's probably going to focus on damage and disruption, sort of the control aspect as well as damage. So things like empathy, this is a hex that you place on an enemy, and whenever they attack, they take damage, but they also deal less damage. This does both two different roles. This does damage to the enemy, and it also decreases the damage they deal, so it supports your allies by having an enemy deal less damage to them. So what you're generally going to find is different characters are going to kind of have a blend, and to some extent, roles are going to be a little bit dynamic as you are currently actively engaged in combat based upon what you need to do. But some characters are going to be more pushed in certain directions than others. For example, when I am typically making a monk build, like this one right here that Talcor has default on her, because that's what I've left her with, she has no offensive skills, but she still has a weapon. She can auto-attack. And that adds a little bit of additional damage, a little bit of additional pressure. So when you're kind of creating a build, you have to think about some amount of these roles. How are you going to be doing stuff? How are you going to be managing things? And there's some arguments for concentrating things based on like attribute lines and capabilities and things like that. But there's also some arguments for distributing stuff. So if you concentrate things, somebody can focus on a specific task. And this matters much more for a human player than an AI. AI is going to be able to kind of split focus a little bit better. But as a human player, for example, you can make a build that blends offense and defense. But when you're offensive, you're focusing on the enemies and what you need to do to them. And when you're playing a defensive type role, you're going to be focusing on your allies and what you can do to support them. So it's very difficult to be like, okay, where's the enemy? I need to attack them. Oh, I also need to look at my party members' HP bars. Trying to juggle both of those, you can do it, but it is additional like mental load. So there's some elements of that for a human player. But advantages of distributing tasks, like for example, supportive or defensive things, one of the advantages of distributing that across multiple party members is that if one party member goes down, you don't suddenly lose that sort of thing. The other thing is it distributes the burden. So there's a couple advantages to this. One, you can only be doing a thing at a time usually. So if I am casting a spell on one ally, I cannot also be casting another spell on another ally. But if two different allies or three different allies are able to heal, as an example, they are able to do that all simultaneously. So there's some nice redundancy there as well. I actually experimented at a point in time when Guild Wars 2 was announced with, because they said they weren't going to have a dedicated healing class. And so I experimented around with, what if I made a team build that doesn't have a dedicated healer? And it actually works surprisingly well. You do get a decent amount of resiliency doing that sort of thing. So when it comes to creating a build then, what you're really looking to do is, what roles do I need? What functionality do I want to have? What sort of things do I want to try to do as a human player? How can I best support that? But you also need to consider the area you're going into. So, as an example, if I were to go into Sumai Village in the Xingzhe areas over here, I know that in normal mode, all of those enemies are going to be very low level. That means they're going to be especially susceptible to armor-respecting damage types. So, characters that deal elemental damage or physical damage are going to hit those enemies a lot harder than, say, a Mesmer will. Now, it doesn't matter that much because the enemies are low level, they have very low health, but still, it's one of those things where I can take a Mesmer that maybe deals 90 damage with an energy surge, or I can bring an Elementalist that's Rodgort's Invocation is going to hit for like 150, 200 damage. That's clearly going to be taking enemies out a lot more quickly. It's also important to know, like, if you're in a high-end area, let's say you're in the Eye of the North. I'm not going to jump there because I want to do some stuff in this area, but let's say you're in the Eye of the North and you know you're going to be fighting destroyers. Well, destroyers have a lot of armor, especially against fire damage, and they're immune to burning, but they are vulnerable to bleeding, poison, disease. They are fleshy, so they're vulnerable to those things. Well, if you know you're going to be fighting destroyers, then you might want to specifically cater what you're doing around that. So it's possible to make kind of a general purpose build, one that's generally going to work in most places, and that's, especially in normal mode, that's very true. You can do that, but you can get a lot more effectiveness if you kind of cater to the area. So, for example, in this area, in Kaineng City, I expect a lot of Ampha and Jade Brotherhood, and they have particular builds. This is something you can look up on the wiki, the Guild Wars wiki. So you can bring it up in-game with F10, and you can go to the official wiki, and it's got stuff for skills and all sorts of random stuff. So I can look up explorable zones. I can look up what enemies are in those areas, and I can learn about what sort of skills they use, what sort of things they do. Now, I've played the game enough that I know, generally speaking, that the Ampha use a lot of conditions. Their assassins use flashing blades, which is an elite that allows them to block while they're attacking. And so I might want to specifically make sure, if I'm going into this area, and I know I'm going to be fighting Ampha, that I have condition removal and I have some way of dealing with stances for any physical attackers that I bring. So those are some things that I can know of, like, okay, I want to specifically make sure I'm going to be able to deal with these particular issues. I also know the Jade Brotherhood are in the area. There's a couple of important things about the Jade Brotherhood. First of all, they like to use wards, ward against foes specifically, to slow down movement of melee attackers. Maybe I want to aim my party a little bit more towards doing ranged stuff. Maybe I want to take this warrior and use a spear specifically, so I don't have to run up to enemies, because that becomes a little challenged. I also know that they use ritualists that use Weapon of Warding. I don't really have a way around Weapon of Warding. It's a weapon spell. I can't remove it. That means maybe I want to focus a little bit more on spell damage, or maybe I want to bring stuff that specifically prevents blocking, say Rigor Mortis, or maybe I want to make sure I have Warrior's Cunning on my warrior so I can not be blocked. These are some potential considerations. I also know that they like to use Dragon Stomp, which is a long 3-second activation time knockdown skill. Maybe I want to make sure I have some interrupts to deal with that. And their warriors use Triple Chop. They can run up into your party and do a lot of damage. Maybe I want to use minions as a buffer. Maybe I want to shy away from minions because they're going to cut them down quickly. They're especially vulnerable to punishing hexes like Empathy, because they can hit multiple dudes with that. So there's a lot of different things that you can consider when you're going into these areas of, like, how can I specifically understand what the enemy is going to do and what I can do about it? It's also important, on the other hand, to consider what enemies might do about what you are going to do. So, as examples of this, often bringing a bunch of minions is a useful strategy because they provide a buffer wall. They're a bunch of extra meat, basically, for the enemy to have to attack through, right? But if you know that the enemies in an area have skills that specifically punish you for bringing minions, maybe say they have, let me grab a necromancer here. So let's say they have, where is it? Virata's Aura, right? This allows them to be able to steal your minions. Well, you don't want to make a bunch of minions for them to, like, Virata's Gaze or Virata's Aura, so maybe minions aren't great in an area where there's a lot of that. Or minions also become a lot less interesting if you're in an area where enemies are using the Smiting Prayers spell, Ray of Judgment, because it deals a lot of holy damage that really eats through minions very quickly. Further, there are some areas where fleshy enemies are in short supply or almost non-existent. Well, those sorts of enemies don't leave corpses, so a minion master just doesn't work. And furthermore, if you're going into that sort of area, maybe you want to shy away from trying to inflict bleed or poison or disease because those don't affect fleshy enemies. So these are all things that you want to consider when you're making a build. You want to think about what sort of enemies are in the area, what sort of things am I trying to do, how do I want to deal with them, and you can always take these to various degrees. You have to care about the enemies more in hard mode than you do in normal mode, for example, and just being aware of what the enemy's capabilities are is really important. So once we've dealt with all of that sort of stuff, thinking about roles and all of these things, thinking about what the enemies are going to do, what sort of things you want to bring, let's go ahead and put some of this into practice, and let's think about this area. So I talked about there being Jade, Brotherhood, and Ampha around here. So there's plenty of corpses, so I can bring a death magic build if I want to bring one. That certainly is something that I can do. But maybe I want to do something a little bit weird. Maybe I want to play around and experiment a bit, and maybe I don't want to bring any dedicated healers. As an example, not for any particular reason, but just because it's fun to experiment. It's fun to try things. So in that case, in this area, maybe I want to make my warrior a warrior monk. I have a few healing prayer spells that I can use. I don't know why I have healing burst on them because it's not very good, but so I have some options this way. And maybe let's think through here. So I probably want a dervish. So there's a couple of reasons why I might want a dervish, but they have a lot of ability to potentially do some healing. That sounds like something that I might want with the direction that I'm going, where maybe I'm not bringing a dedicated healer. Maybe I do bring a monk, but maybe I bring, let's see, I'm not sure if I have a monk set up well for being Smiting Prayers on this character or not. But maybe I do bring a Smiting Prayers monk. Nope, none of them are really well suited for that. Okay, well let's not. Let's actually do something strange, because part of your consideration that you're going to need as you make your party is you're going to want to consider things like, what are the energy costs of the build that you are making, right? What are the energy requirements? So I'm going to want to come here, and I'm going to want to use some wind prayers over here. And sure, we can leave Resurrection Chant on. So you may or may not want Resurrection skills. There's different options. So Victorious Sweep. Victorious Sweep is a skill that I probably am going to want in this sort of build. The reason why? It heals them. Skills that heal are going to be useful in what I'm trying to do here. Now, I also know this is an area with a lot of Ampha, so I might want to intentionally bring, say, Avatar of Melandru, because, as you can see, it says all party members in earshot lose a condition whenever I lose a dervish enchantment. But I might not. And the reasons why I might not is because that requires me to specifically make this a build that loses enchantments. Perhaps I don't want to do that. There are some reasons why I might not. For example, Dwayna's Touch becomes really attractive for what I'm trying to do. This heals a touched ally for some health. But that's for each enchantment on me. If I'm removing my enchantments, it doesn't work. So maybe I want to bring that, and maybe I want to bring Mystic Healing, which heals all enchanted allies. Okay, this starts looking like some sort of build with some healing capabilities. And for good measure, maybe I want Imbue Health. Target other allies healed for a chunk of your maximum HP. Okay, these are all ways that I can bring healing, but now I want to load up some enchantments. I can bring Mystic Vigor, because this allows me to heal myself. That's useful. So maybe I want to do that. And maybe I want some sort of elite here. So I have a couple of different options. I can bring Pious Renewal, which is always useful. I could potentially bring Arcane Zeal, which allows for a little bit of energy management from casting spells, but that's not the most exciting option if you ask me. Onslaught's actually really good in this sort of build, though, because Onslaught allows my character to attack faster, but it's also an enchantment that can support these two skills and support this one. And then Grenth's Aura heals as well. So now this build is kind of focused on, well, it's an offensive character, but also one that's kind of focused on healing. So that then starts to open up some options. And I can go over here to a Paragon, and I can get some additional support stuff going on. So maybe I want to make this a Paragon Monk, and maybe instead of going into Command, I want to go into Smiting Prayers, because I want some of the damage from that. Okay, that seems like a pretty decent option. Here's Wild Throw. I might want to keep Wild Throw on, because as you can see, it removes stances. That sounds like something that might be useful. Now, I'm probably going to want Go for the Eyes, because Go for the Eyes is really important for energy management. That's something that this character is going to want to be able to help control the energy of the party. I'm going to bring Signet of Return in order to be able to resurrect party members. So then I'm going to give this character Ray of Judgment and maybe Smite Condition. Smite Condition sounds like a good option here, because this is going to allow me to be able to deal with some of the conditions that I'm going to see getting thrown around. That seems like a good choice too. And are there any other skills that I want from here? Probably not. Smiting Prayers is not the deepest attribute line, but these are some interesting options that I think give me just a little bit more utility on this character. And then if we are continuing to look through, let's see, what are some other things that might be good? Glowing Signet. Glowing Signet works really well with Ray of Judgment. It gives energy back if the foe's burning, and this sets foes on fire. Okay, so that sounds like a good combination. And let's see, what else might I want to do? Let's see. I need to think through my options. Potentially Smite Hex, although I can't think off the top of my head of hexes that the enemy uses here. I myself might want to shy away from hexes. Let's see. Let's go ahead and bring Blazing Spear, because that'll work with Glowing Signet as well. And what's a good last skill? Maybe Disrupting Spear. Right here, Disrupting Throw, because this interrupts a foe suffering from a condition. Okay, so we're starting to kind of build stuff up. Now, I'm going to need to be able to inflict conditions, which this build doesn't do. And this build kind of does with a little bit of burning, but I'm going to want to make sure I can inflict some conditions if I'm going to want Disrupting Throw to work. I'm also going to want some sort of disruption to be able to stop some of the spells I don't want to have happening. And I have a couple of options in that regard. But I think I'm going to go with a Ranger. So let's go ahead and grab Margaret the Sly here. And what I think I want to do with her is I think I'm going to want to bring a couple of interrupts. So that's what she's got going on here. I don't know why these are on her bar, because these are not doing much. I maybe was using them for demonstrative purposes or something. But I think I'm going to actually stick her in, not channeling magic here. I'm going to give her some communing. So this is just kind of my thought process, right? So a lot of the times I'm going to use a 10, 11, 10 sort of attribute line split just to try to kind of maximize some of the values that I'm getting. Now, the reason why I would go this way with her is because it allows me to be able to use something like Shadow Song to help support the party, right? Shadow Song can blind those warriors that would otherwise be causing problems. So that adds some additional durability. And maybe I want Union, because Union allows the party to be a little bit more durable too. So those are a couple of good options. And Pain is just good for some additional damage in this regard as well. Now, what are some other things that I might want to do? Well, I talked about wanting to potentially inflict some conditions. So maybe I want something like Melandriu's Shot, right? It inflicts bleeding when it hits, and if a foe is moving or knocked down, it deals some additional damage and cripples them. That might be something that's useful, but that is spending my elite slot. Is that what I want to do with my elite? Maybe, but I also can just bring, say, Hunter Shot if I want to be inflicting bleeding. So maybe I bring that as an option. And now I notice I'm not using any preparations, so maybe I want to bring something like Glass Arrows as a preparation to get additional damage in, or maybe I want something like Oathshot or Marksman's Wager. Those can be useful options as well. Or I can bring Magebane's Shot. This is an interrupt that can't be blocked. And so maybe I want to bring that and focus a little bit more on the interrupt direction with this particular character. Okay. So I'm beginning to build up sort of the profile of what this party is doing. Now, at some point, I'm going to need to focus on what I'm going to be doing over here as a warrior, but let's continue looking through. So I have a couple of other support options that I can do. I can, for example, just go with a standard Signet of Spirits type build. This is a very standard sort of build that I will bring with Signet of Spirits and Blood Song, Spirit Light and Men, Body, and Soul, and Spirit Siphon for some energy management. Because this is another one of those things that you want to think about, is how are you managing the energy among your team? What are you doing to work that energy to make sure that your party is able to keep functioning? So all of these skills are for the most part, strong skills and facilitate stuff. And Painful Bond here, in particular, will work well with Shadow Song and Pain. So this will actually work as a really nice complement. So the basics here are there's Resurrection, there's some spirit-creating skills in the form of Signet of Spirits and Blood Song. There's some healing in the form of Spirit Light and Men, Body, and Soul. This character has some energy management in the form of Spirit Siphon. And then Painful Bond increases the damage from these two skills, and Splinter Weapon is really good for doing additional AoE damage. That seems like the sort of character that I'm going to want in this sort of scenario, but not the only, like I need more effects. Obviously, I've got more character slots. So, let's see. I maybe want to focus more on ranged stuff. Let's get some sort of caster in here. So maybe I want a Necromancer because they have really good energy support. Let's look at bringing Olias in. So Olias is set up to do minion stuff. He's got a lot of death magic, and minions are definitely going to be something that could be a helpful sort of buffer, but maybe I don't want to go that direction, or maybe I do. Maybe I want to do something, Infused Condition, Foul Feast. Maybe I do want to go something kind of this way, or let's see. I think I might want to go more towards the Ritualist route, though, for a couple of different reasons that we'll get to later. So I don't need that much death magic, because another point of death magic, it helps some, but it only helps so far, right? So let's go ahead and do this. And then, rather than animate Bone Fiend, which is really expensive, and it has its uses for sure, and I think I might focus on animate Bone Minions. So right here, what's going on is there's this combo. Infused Condition is whenever this character receives a condition, that condition is transferred to the closest minion instead. And Foul Feast allows this character to take conditions from party members. So that allows them to be able to go from party members to minions. And here we have a bunch of minion skills. But I want a couple of skills over here. I think I might go with Spirit Light because it's a really strong heal. But then I think maybe I want something like a Spirit Light Weapon. Because Spirit Light Weapon gives a bunch of health gain. So that's something that can add a lot of additional durability, a lot of additional healing. And again, I'm not having a dedicated healer. I'm splitting that stuff up. And as I kind of was mentioning earlier, one of the advantages of spreading that sort of stuff around is that it allows different characters to be able to focus on healing instead of like one character getting bogged down in it. So looking across my characters, I actually need a few more specific healing things. Like this is not healing, this is just offensive stuff. There's a bunch of healing here, but I need more enchantments going on if Mystic Healing is going to be any good. So with that in mind, let's add... what's somebody that's good at enchanting everybody? That's going to be doing so in a useful way. Well, there are some useful monk enchantments that I might want to have everybody getting. But there's also some other useful ones to kind of throw around. So let's see. I'm going to be going into an area with a lot of physical attackers. Maybe I want... Just trying to think through. Because like at this point, I've got 2 slots left, right? And I want to think through, okay, what do I want to have? Let's throw on Vec here. And let's bring... I know. Let's bring Vec. Let's see. Do I want... No, let's go Protection Prayers, because I want to bring some protection skills on him. And then... Let's see. So Fire Magic has some options that I could use. Earth Magic has some useful defensive stuff. But I think what I'm going to want is I'm going to want Water Magic. So there's a couple of useful things that I get from Water Magic. So let's drop all these things. Let's hang on to Glyph of Lesser Energy for the moment, because I might want that. So I want to bring Aegis. Aegis enchants all of my party members, gives them the ability to block. And then let's give him Guardian and Shielding Hands, say. And then we're going to focus some on Water Magic. Well, I'm going to bring Ward Against Harm. This will give us some additional health regeneration, but it also lets the party have additional armor, which reduces the damage that they take. And then I like bringing maybe Deep Freeze. If I can find it, here it is. And what should my last skill be? Swirling Aura doesn't really do much if I'm not getting Overcast. So that doesn't really appeal to me that much. This might actually be... So I might want to bring Swirling Aura instead of Guardian, because it gives a little bit of block, it gives some healing. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm going to want to bring a skill that allows him to gain Overcast in order to be able to take advantage of its party-wide nature. So let's see. What are some of my options for Overcast skills? Maelstrom is a really strong one, but the energy cost is already pretty high on this. So this is one of those things where it kind of becomes a little awkward to try to figure out what I want to use for this last slot, because there's only so many options. And I'm focusing so much on certain things that other things become less attractive. So let's see. None of these energy storage skills do it. So basically my options are like Icy Prism or Maelstrom. I think I'm going to go with... Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Icy Prism. Okay, so this adds a little bit more support, a little bit more defense, and adds ways to get enchantments on the rest of my party. And that's something that I'm going to want, again, because I want Mystic Healing to be able to heal as many party members as possible, because it heals all enchanted party members. Okay, so now I get one last slot. And I've got ways of dealing with conditions. I think maybe... Okay. I think I'm going to bring Zandra. And instead of running... Ooh, she's better equipped to do that build. So, Parias does not have a channeling magic rune, and Zandra does. So I think I'm actually going to switch Zandra over to doing the that build. And I'm going to drop a couple of skills off of her to put on Siphon Spirit and Painful Bond, because they're just going to be better on her. And I'm going to come over here to Parias, and I'm going to make him / Necromancer. And I'm going to focus him on Restoration Magic. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to push a bit more in... Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to focus more on Spawning Power and Death Magic. Now, Elias is already kind of doing this Infuse Condition Necromancery thing. So maybe I want to take the direction over here. Because I'm thinking through, like, I want to make use of Spirit's Gift, right? Which is whenever you create a creature, all allies near that creature gain 41 health and lose 1 condition. That to me sounds like a really interesting option, and it works really well with Animate Bone minions. So maybe I want Elias to not bring Animate Bone minions, and maybe I want him to have some other support skill from this attribute line. Maybe Wielder's Boon. That seems like an option for healing people. That would actually work out pretty well. And then, like, these guys will make this work. So I don't really need more minions there. But maybe I want Death Nova and Explosive Growth. Because Explosive Growth will make those minions I raise also deal damage. And then maybe I want some sort of Spirited Home. So maybe I lower these a bit and I go into... Yeah, let's go into Restoration Magic. But let's go a little bit of a different direction. Let's bring Rejuvenation. Because now when I create Rejuvenation, Boon of Creation will go off, giving energy back, Explosive Growth will go off, and Spirit's Gift will go off. And then, let's see, what's one more something that I can bring that would be useful here? Because I kind of want... You know what, let's just bring Animate Shambling Horror. Like, this is a really good animation spell, and I don't mind having a couple of them going on. So, let's try something like this for my heroes. Now, this may or may not work, and if you're trying to make your own build, this is part of what you're going to run into. You're going to experiment with things, and not all of those experiments are going to be successful ones. Now, what I want to do for myself is I want to bring... I do not have Resurrection Chant on this character? Huh. Anyway, I'm going to bring a couple of very specific enchantments, and then I'm going to want to bring Resurrection Chant. I'm also going to want to bring a Surin Scan. This makes my attacks unable to miss my foe, which means they can't block or anything else. This is a PvE only skill, so my heroes don't get access to it. It's something strong that I can use, but only me. And that kind of makes it very specific. Okay, so I'm going to want to go get Resurrection Chant, because for some reason this character doesn't have it. Like I said, that's very easy to do because it is a factions skill. I just have to find a good skill trainer. I guess I can go find... Actually, there's one in Senji's corner, I believe. So I need to go grab the funds for it. I'm really surprised this character doesn't have Resurrection Chant, but I don't see it, so here we are. Now, I need to pick what weapon I want to use, and there's a couple of different options. I can specifically go for, say, like, hammer, or axe. Well, I have hammer, axe, or sword that I can use, and I have to pick what one I want to use. And there's a couple of different reasons why I might want to pick a specific one. Sword, for example, can work well with adding some additional bleeding going on. Margaret the Sly has a little bit of that with Hunter's Shot, and it helps support disrupting throw. Alternatively, I could want to go for Axe because it has some good area of effect damage. I think I'm going to want something that's going to be good at getting some additional conditions spread around. Here's Resurrection Chant. Thank you. So, let's see. I want Resurrection Chant. Now, I'm going to need some amount of healing prayers to make these worthwhile. I'm going to go ahead and go 10 healing prayers because I really want these spells, these two support enchantments, to be something that are highly functional. Okay, so now I need to figure out what I'm doing. And I kind of am leaning a little bit towards... Let's see, I want to focus on strength. And actually, this would be a good moment to switch my hat. I don't necessarily know that I'm going that way, but I'm going to want some strength. And I'm not inflicting cracked armor, so something like Body Blow is not a good choice here. But something like Bull's Charge could be an interesting elite option. I'm a little bit leaning towards using Crippling Slash. Because that inflicts crippled, and that's an additional condition that I can have going on. So I could use like Crippling Slash and Gash. I could also go into Axe for stuff. But Hammer... Actually, let's go Hammer, I think. The reason why is oh, no way. I can't use... Okay, I'm going Sword then. So, I'm going Sword because I'm using an elite already. That elite is Healing Hands, and I want to keep using Healing Hands. So, I'm going to go ahead and put my points into Swordsmanship. Now, this is a Strength Shield. That's good. That's the shield that I'm going to want to use. And I'm going to want to make sure I have my Zealous Sword equipped. Okay. So, Sword works out pretty well even with without your elite. I'm going to bring Gash, but I'm not going to bring Sever Artery or any of those, just because I can actually just make use of Gash as is. With my... Margaret the Sly is going to be inflicting bleeding. And Prius is using Animate Shambling Horror, and so is Elias. When those die, they make Jagged Horrors that also inflict bleeding. So I don't need an additional source of bleed myself necessarily, because my party is going to support me in that regard. What I do want is I want an increased attack speed skill. So I have a couple of options for that. I can use something like Flail. And I think I am going to use Flail. I'm going to use Flail, and I'm going to go ahead and bring Sprint, I think. Because I want to be able to get out of Flail once that starts going. Because Flail makes me move slower, and I'm going to want to be able to undo that if the enemy starts moving around and things like that. And then I'm going to bring Whirlwind Attack. This is another PvE-only skill, but it allows me to be able to attack multiple enemies. Now, this is a little bit light on attack skills. Normally, I would want more attack skills in the normal sort of build that I'd make, but this isn't a normal sort of build. So, is this build going to work well, or is it not? Well, I'm certainly trying to cover a bunch of bases, but I'm also probably a little bit low on healing. But let's kind of look at it all at once. If we look over here at the left, I've brought up all these skills. Well, there's some healing going on with some of these animation skills here, so that's going to help. There's some healing going on here with what Kamu is doing. There is some healing going on here that Elias has, and Zandra also has some strong healing put in. So we've got some protection, we've got some healing. Maybe this is going to work, maybe it's not, but it's the experiment, right? And the experiment can be quite fun. So let's go ahead and go out and see how this works. And if people like this sort of build crafty thing, I'm absolutely interested in doing more because I think that's really interesting. So we have some Jade Brotherhood up here. Now, before I really get fighting, I'm going to want to throw Vigorous Spirit on myself because it allows me to be able to get some additional healing in. Now, Elias is going to be taking some damage, and already I'm like, okay, and I'm having to focus on healing my dudes. Everything went fine for that, but that was our first confrontation. So let's see how things go when we get into our second confrontation. Okay, so already I'm noticing that we've got some good health regeneration going on from swirling aura. Now, I look at Vec and I'm noticing, Vec's energy is running a little tight. So that's something that I might want to consider. I might want to find ways of providing Vec more energy. There's different ways that could be done, but that's something that I might want to look at and might want to consider. So, let's see. I don't know if I have any quest active here. Yeah, no, I don't. Okay. So these guys are attacking me, so I'm going to put healing hands on myself. Okay, you can see the slowing ward. Oh, that guy got interrupted. Again, Margaret the Sly has a bunch of interrupting skills. We have quite the horde of minions coming along. But we're also making a lot of spirits. So I'm curious how this is going to work once we get to an area. Like, one of the things that can be a problem is the AI can focus a bit too much on trying to keep minions alive. So that's something to keep an eye out on. We're also not fighting large quantities of enemies. So far, things are going okay. But energy is running a little bit tight. Okay, so I want... This gives me healing whenever I attack and stuff. So... it's quite useful in that regard. Now, right now, we're just fighting these Jade Brotherhood Knights, and they're not really being a problem. They're going down pretty easily, in fact. So, we've been fighting a lot of those. Now, this area up here is a bit of a Jade Brotherhood stronghold. So let's wander in and see how everything goes when we go in an area where there's maybe a few more enemies, eh? So I can see that he does have bleeding on him from other sources, so that's good. We have a lot of minion horde here. So that's pretty cool. A lot of minions. We have a lot of minions, actually. I usually don't bring 2 minion masters, and the fact that we have 2 is making this quite deadly. So here's a much bigger group. This will be a much better test of how effective everything is. So already I'm seeing Elias is suffering. So I threw healing hands on him. He seems to be stabilized at the moment. So that's good. Okay, there's a couple of knights in our back line, but there's an absolute metric ton of minions over there. And Ward Against Harm is helping to give some additional support and healing. So this is actually working out pretty well so far. Now these are Jade Brotherhood, not Ampha. And Ampha might give us different considerations. But our party members are often being enchanted, or at least they are when Aegis is happening. Now, this is normal mode. This build might not work in hard mode. This build might work absolutely terribly in certain areas. In fact, I'm sure this build would work terribly in certain areas that have more minions or that have more AI that are resurrecting, or that are animating minions themselves or otherwise using corpses. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind. One of my jobs, too, is I might be a warrior, but I want to spread around Vigorous Spirit, because Vigorous Spirit gives some additional healing support. So I don't know how much we're going to wander around in this area, but we are doing really well, and this build is actually performing quite admirably, at least in this context. And I wouldn't say any of these characters is a dedicated healer. I would say there are characters that have a bunch of healing ability, but you know, I wouldn't say any of them are dedicated healers. Now, I want to go find us some Ampha, and I'm not sure how many are in this zone or if I need to go to another nearby zone. But I kind of want to see how this build deals with that. So, let's go exploring. Kaineng City is a very quirky place, and honestly, I would recommend perhaps a slightly more traditional build with some increased movement speed skills. But, you know, your mileage will vary. But I am actually feeling quite pleased with like how well this is working, and it does some very different stuff. Elias will occasionally use Blood of the Master to do stuff. Okay, so this zone is going to make it hard to find. I think there's some Ampha down that way, so maybe I should head more that direction and see what I can find. Again, it's very different. I topped the Stone Summit. What? It's very different sort of areas in Kaineng City, just because there's a lot more of that sort of city feel with some of this sort of gang activity spread throughout. Oh, there's a quest over there. That's nice. And maybe I want to take a moment to apply that to Elias. Okay. That the way I want to go? I think I want to go this way. So, some of the things that we are seeing is some of the energy can be a little tight on some of the characters. That's something to be aware of. So, if I find that stuff doesn't go as well as I would like with this build, maybe at some point in time I want to find a way to work Blood Ritual onto some of the characters to be able to get some additional energy support. Or maybe I needed to work more energy management into specific characters. Now, Parias has some specific energy management here in the form of Boon of Creation. Vec has Glyph of Lesser Energy to help with his energy requirements. Glowing Signet and Go for the Eyes help General Morgan with his energy needs. But, say, Kamu doesn't have any specific energy management going on. And Zondra does, so I've got a decent amount, actually. But Margaret maybe doesn't have specific energy management. Maybe that's cause for concern. I imagine Union goes down pretty quickly. Well, this little group of Ampha is not causing too much difficulty. It lets us refresh some of our minion hordes. Alright. Let's see. There should be more Ampha than that, but I think that we're going to have to go down this way to try to find them. But you can see where, like, considering what sort of roles your characters are playing, like General Morgan is mostly offensive, but he's got a little bit of support with Smite Condition. He's got a little bit of disruption with Disrupting Throw. Wild Throw, getting rid of stances is additional sort of stuff that way as well. This has some healing and some offense kind of mixed together. So that's really cool. Oh, now we're getting some of those conditions that the Ampha are known for. And we've got more Ampha kind of sneaking up behind us. This is going to test us a bit more. A little bit more. Okay. Yeah, they're putting up a little bit of a fight here. And Vec, the biggest thing that I'm seeing is Vec's energy is very challenged. Which doesn't surprise me. I was kind of anticipating that that would be the case. Let's go down this way and see if we can find a few more. They populate more like the Undercity, and there's some areas in Buckdeck Byway where I know they also hang out. But you can see where, like, I took an idea of like, I know the sort of enemies I'm expecting in this area. Here's some skills that can help deal with that. And so I'm trying to understand, given what I expect to find, how can I set stuff up to give myself a better chance of success? And that's fun. That's fun to look at. It's fun to try to come up with your own builds. It's fun to try to say, okay, I know what I'm going to be facing here. What can I do to try to do something about that, right? And I enjoy that sort of challenge. And not everybody does. Some people want to try to make specifically highly tuned builds to go through areas as effectively as possible. And there's areas for that. As I've mentioned, PVX Wiki is a great place to look in that. But if you want to make your own builds, if you want to understand how the systems work, trying stuff, experimenting with things, seeing what sort of challenges you can set for yourself, of things to try and do, can be a lot of fun and can be a great way of experiencing the game in a different sort of context. And also to think about how can some of these ideas transfer? Like, part of what's making this team so effective is the fact that, bottle of grog, is that we have an absolute metric ton of minions that are just cluttering up the enemy. Like, a lot of the time, they're not even dealing damage to us. Minions are a form of damage mitigation, in fact, in that regard. So, yeah, this has been, I guess, kind of an exploration of, let's make a build concept. And you can take this approach to different areas and to different modes, and knowing what sort of things to expect from the enemies can allow you to be able to determine what it is that you want to do in that area to try to deal with them. And so it's all different parameters for different situations, but it's fun to experiment, and it's fun to try different things, and it's fun to say, oh, well, I can make this character be able to fulfill some of this role, and that has benefit. And I can say, oh, maybe I want this character to do this sort of role, and what do I get out of that? And what sort of interesting constructions can I create? I'm going to want healing hands. Yeah, there's Kamu going in there, laying the smackdown on them. So you can see, like, the intense amounts of conditions going on, and that's where something like Smite Condition starts doing a lot of additional damage. And our absolute massive horde of minions being extremely effective. So, man, we have such a huge horde of minions. It's kind of fun. So I'm going to just take out Sun here, and then I'm going to head back to an outpost. But hopefully this has been a useful look, a useful way of thinking about how do you make builds in this game. Add some useful understanding for just the context of the systems, all that sort of stuff. I love this game. I love the build system. I love trying to get creative and think through how can I make stuff that works well, and is interesting to work with. And sometimes you get these really crazy, creative, like massive horde of minions type things, and it's fun to do. It's fun to think through. It's fun to just experiment and say, what can I make? And this is what I've made today. And in this context, it's working really well. I wouldn't want to take this into an area with a lot of undead, because it's not going to work well in that context. But in the context of here, this has worked quite brilliantly. So I've had fun. I hope you've been able to learn a little bit about how this game works, some of the thinking that goes into making a build, thinking about what sort of effects you want, what do you want to prioritize, what do you maybe not need to prioritize for. So, for example, I did not put any hex removal on any of my characters, because when I think about the Ampha and the Jade Brotherhood, I don't think about hexes. But there are other areas where I absolutely want hex removal, because there's going to be a lot. I also didn't bring any enchantment removal because I don't associate needing enchantment removal with this sort of area. But if I were to go to the Eye of the North, for example, I absolutely would want enchantment removal because raptors, for example, are going to use blocking enchantments as really obnoxious. So there are areas where you're going to want certain effects, areas where you don't need them as much. And understanding what enemies you're going to be facing allows you to be able to custom tune builds to a specific area and be really effective. And like I said, I often do make kind of like generic builds. Like, frankly, the one Zandra has is very generic. This is a standard sort of build that I will use. This Signet of Spirits build. Because it does a lot of different roles. It adds damage through Signet of Spirits and Bloodsong and Splinter Weapon and Painful Bond, but it also has healing in Spirit Light and Mend Body and Soul. And so these support the party, as well as dealing damage to enemies. But, you know, this is a weird, quirky build that I've got going on here on Vec, but it adds support through some useful enchantments. It adds some snaring and whatnot, and some additional damage. So it's more of a support build, but it's got a little bit of damage in it. This is a weird sort of damagey support build. And so, like, I've kind of blended roles, and everybody, because of that, supports each other in a very different sort of way. And so it's fun to go through this sort of stuff, and it's fun to experiment, and it's fun to think about what's going to be effective in this area. What might I not need in this area? What might I need in this area? If I'm going to be, say, like I said, fighting dinosaurs in some of the Eye of the North areas, or if I'm going to be fighting a lot of undead in, say, Kryta, or if I'm going to be a 4-person party fighting Char in Ascalon. All of these have different needs. All of them have different requirements. All of them require you to think about, what do I need this party to be doing? But it's fun to do that experimentation, and hopefully you've been able to see why I think so. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here for today. So until next time, everyone, take care and goodbye.